open up your door.
The reason I made this film, I wasn't even remotely interested in archive. And in fact, I had a real prejudice against archive, because the only sort of archive black and white films I watched was when I was growing up, and I always hated them. I felt great antipathy to them almost, because they had silly, jazzy, plonky-plonk music on them. And I found them very violent. I remember being very scared by archive, or it just seemed like everyone was different to me, and they all moved faster and they looked weird, and it was just alien. And the reason I got involved in making this film is because I thought how extraordinary to sort of explore the sort of back catalogue of films in the BFI and make something that meant something for 2015. That was always the idea, that it would mean something for this year, and it would be about how Britain is changing. It would be a celebration of change, rather than what we feel, it feels like we're living in, is people trying to drag us back, you know, often like with UKIP, or with, you know, you get things where we don't seem to be enjoying the fact that we're very multicultural, or that, you know, we're harping on things. So that was the idea of making the film. And also what I discovered, which was what's so interesting, is that when you put archive or silent or different films over Richard Hawley singing, a contemporary singing, even though I wouldn't call him a particularly modern sound, you know, because I don't know what you guys listen to, but the sounds I listen to, they sort of sound often like they're 2014, 50, you know, you can tell that they're new songs. But when you put him to the archive, it changed, it started to live. And you looked at people from 1927, you know, the English women's football team, you know, practicing in a muddy field, and they looked just like people that might live around the corner in Stoke Newington, or they looked really familiar and really ordinary, and that you might know them. And that kept happening and kept surprising us. Also what happened, there was a track that we put over a scene which is like it's based on Close Encounters. It's a scene of a doomed love affair, and it's a man remembering this man he was in love with, and how they are not together anymore, and so the pain of reliving it. And when and the track that Ollie put over it was "It's All Over Love," and when you listen to the track without the video, without the film of the archive film, it's like it's all about love. All the pain is about love. When you listen to it with the track, it reads as "It's all over, my love," you know. And the reason it's all over is because we couldn't cope with all the petty restrictions. It's so hard to be in love as two men, and it was just too difficult, and it reads as that. And I remember when we showed it to Richard Hawley, because we were sort of slightly nervous, because we thought, actually, this is what's so interesting about pop promos. I love watching them, because you remember, like, I don't know if you remember Tightrope with I'm Walking on a Tightrope. It's this thing, it's all set in a mental home. It's one of my favourite songs. And whenever I hear the music, it's got this wonderful dancing, and I remember the dancing when you listen to the song. And so now I always associate that Richard Hawley track with these two guys, and, you know, the doomed love on the train. And we thought, oh God, you know, we've given this song a personality and a life, a different life. And he said, I love what you've done with this. This is fantastic. And I said, oh, Richard, I thought you wouldn't like this. You know, I was a bit nervous because I don't know you, and you're a guy down the pub, you know, you're real, you know, and your dad worked in the steel mill, and I know, you know, I thought you might not like it. And he said, put it this way, Kim, I've never been chucked out of a gay bar. And his manager was listening, and he said, never been in a gay bar. So it was immediately sweet, and we were immediately close, and it was lovely. So then we felt free to do what we were trying to do, really. Well, I was nervous because, and so was Ollie, I'll just be honest with you, because he is so different to me. I mean, I don't really drink, and we had to meet him in pubs, and, you know, and he's very much a man's man. I don't really know many men like that. The men I hang out with, I'm afraid, are all very sensitive and bookish and into they're into music, but they're very sort of like girl-friendly men, you know what I mean? So I was a little bit about, and he's into sort of music that I don't really know about. So I tried to learn up about it. Anyway, I can't remember the names, but sort of folk and stuff that I don't really listen to. And but I immediately took to him, and what I took to about him was he's a very honest person. He talks very honestly and very openly and very naturally. So I think Ollie and I immediately felt at peace with him, which is a lovely feeling. And when I had to come clean and say I don't really want a pint, he was very sweet about it. It didn't matter. I had my cup of tea, and so that was lovely. So that was the beginning, really. And then we were anxious that he'd be very difficult about the music and very prescriptive. And he kept phoning us up and saying, I've got just the track for this bit of archive. So he gave us Heart of Oak, which is a lovely song that hasn't been released, that's only been done in the studio. It's like just a demo tape. And we said, look, we love it being a demo tape because there's something very raw and something very personal about it. And it's just come from the heart, and it's very immediate, and it's all in one take. And it worked beautifully. And he didn't insist that he redid it, or that, he's not precious in any way. He's fabulous, actually. And we spent a day with him in his house, and I just loved him. And his partner came back and was going on about having got something for £1, and I thought, oh, you're my sort of girl as well. I identified with them and I took to them. So I have to say, it was a total joy. And I would tell you if it wasn't. Everything about it was fantastic. It was almost entirely discovery, and that was what was so exciting about doing it, but really, really hard work, because I don't know a lot about films pre-1980. I haven't watched any older than 1980 films. And, 76, I think one of the first films I watched that really got me into films was Beautiful Laundrette, and I just fell in love with that film. So I knew I wanted Laundrette, I knew Pressure, Horace Ove, and I knew Brick Lane, so I knew I wanted those three. And Sarah Gavron's a friend, so I knew she was fabulous, she gave us that. So those were the three I knew we wanted, and they fitted perfectly, because both Laundrette and Brick Lane are about being from another country and living here. And there's a wonderful scene in Laundrette which everything comes together. It's about falling in love with somebody from a completely different background, and how it changes you and how you stick by them. So it's about people being bullied, because at one point these rough kids who are friends of Daniel Day-Lewis say, we brought the Packies over here to work in the factories. What are you doing, working for one? And I love that, because it's about that within a relationship, within a love affair between a white woman and a Bangladeshi man. It's all kind of mixed in, which I absolutely love, very sort of unselfconsciously. And I think that was what was brilliant about Stephen Frears. It wasn't self-consciously a race film or a gay film. And a lot of gay films I've watched, gay films as gay films, the problem with them for me has been that they've been made as gay films, so they're not particularly good stories. It's a bit like what I have against pornographic films. They're only about sex, they're not about anything else. So they're boring to me, Or Hollywood films, even though I love watching Batman, and the characters don't develop. Batman's always the same character. He doesn't. You don't learn about him changing, or all his moments of doubt. Or you do a bit, but not much. And so what I was wanting was those three films and all that together, because the three strands that I wanted to have in the film was Britain becoming more multicultural and a celebration of that. And I imagined it would be a kind of white Britain, and then it would become more black and Asian, more multicultural. And so Pressure, that scene of the landlady saying, get out, would always be quite central, but there might be some stuff about casual racism earlier. That's what I had in my mind. And then women would be in the corset on the train, a very sedate love affair, and then women would get more and more liberated up to present day. And then the other strand was obviously same-sex, and they all linked together in some way. So that was what we'd do. And I was quite sort of thinking, well, we'll better have a suffragette film, you know. And then actually what we discovered was those overtly and self-consciously, I was thinking the same way as those films which are consciously giving a message. It didn't work. It just wasn't good with Richard Hawley's music. It was boring. And so then I started to look for films with Ollie that showed you different things without you being aware of it. So we found a wonderful women's football team, which kind of jumped out of us, and the jiu-jitsu film, a woman's teaching another woman how to do jiu-jitsu, and it's slightly, well, it's very erotic. She just touches her to show how to stand, but it's not self-consciously erotic, it just is. And I loved that, and that's 1927. So I realised that actually a lot of films that are made in the 20s and 30s were so ahead of their time. It's not simple. Often filmmakers are visionaries, you know, like Stephen Frears was, and Hanif Qureshi, you know, and writers again are ahead, you know. Because those people imagine themselves in the minds of other people, and once you do that, there's no going back. The problem with racist people or homophobic people is they're locked. Somehow, sadly, it's a miserable existence. They're locked in their own minds, like my parents were. You know, you live with hate, you live in a very narrow way, and you miss out. You know, you really miss out. And what I wanted the film to make you feel is the joy of openness and the joy of making real relationships with people different to you and becoming close to them, you know. So we kept coming across these wonderful pieces of archive that forced their way in. The Little Black Girl being celebrated in the Norfolk School in 1941, and they had to be in. So then it became a different film. So that's how we did it. It's like things forced themselves in. Then we thought, okay, right, it's not as obvious it's a progression. Oh, there's a backlash. And what was fascinating, you got the Thatcher backlash, you got the sex therapy, the sex education films that were backlashes. You got nasty little films, you know, which were telling you that if you had a baby, your life was ruined. If you had sex before you were married, you were not going to have a good wedding. You know, really those nasty things that you're being told at school, you know, like we all were at my school, that were militating against beautiful, joyful fiction films. Hindle Wakes, I've never seen that film. A woman has a fling with she works in a factory. She meets her boss and her boss's son, and has a wonderful affair with him. You know, it's just a wonderful affair for its own sake. And then he says, I'll marry you. And she says, but I don't want to marry you. You know, I'm quite happy as I am. And you think, 1926, you know, amazing. You know, all the Hollywood stuff we're seeing at the moment is still boy meets girl. He's usually more successful. He saves her from whatever life it is she's living in, or everything's sorted, they get married, that's the end of it, you know. I've watched so many films like that with my housemate, and he's all enraptured, and I'm going, oh, Colin, this is so boring. And he calls me a curmudgeon because I don't like those. But it's so boring, you know, there's nothing. What I love about that is then she goes out with a guy from the factory. He's not put off her. He still wants to go out with her. So that film kind of changed the way I saw archive, and I'm hoping that the film as a whole opens archive out for people. And I know it's a bit annoying that you can't see. We struggle with that, whether we should put what the archive is after it. But everyone was saying, no, let people get into a story. Don't put what each archive clip is. And I think on the whole it was right. What you have to do is you have to buy the DVD and then freeze it and just work out what it is, you know. Or maybe you could put a little, I don't know, maybe people can have a leaflet or something.